Bon, je crois qu'on va faire tout en anglais. Let's go over into English. I'm sure you all understand English, so I think it'd be interesting, first of all, gentlemen, if you perhaps introduce each other. You know each other quite well. How could you introduce? What would you like to say about each other?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Sébastien here. Alibaba, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this $460 billion market cap company based in China. Small little company that is now focused on what they call the new retail. So maybe Sébastien can tell you about that. But he's been collecting the trading cards of the big tech companies or tech and retail companies for a while now. Amazon, Google, and now Alibaba. Ladies and gentlemen, Sébastien Badault.
And so Ian's been at LVMH now for 3 years, after a very long career pretty much all around digital and music. Created a few startups, which he brilliantly sold, and last job before LVMH was at Beats, Apple Beats, which was sold to Apple and is now basically Apple Music. So this link between the music industry and the luxury industry, but with that link between the two, which is digital. And I think he's made quite a few changes in the past couple of years at this very old and traditional company, and really making a big change, I think, in the way that LVMH is approaching the digital space.
Thank
Ian.
you. Are you happy with each other? Yeah, they are. What is interesting with you is that we have this kind of like cross look between you. So, Ian, if you could tell us how you think Sébastien deals with the luxury culture and digital culture. Is it a love-hate relationship? What's your take on that?
I think that there's no question that Sébastien is taking luxury culture and making sure that it's positioned well within Alibaba and with the executives at Alibaba. But I think that one thing that's interesting, and I'd be curious if Sébastien agrees, having worked in both U.S. West Coast-based companies as well as now China-based company. But I think in some ways Alibaba and other Chinese companies understand luxury more than the Googles and Facebooks, where there really isn't a kind of a lot of knowledge and appreciation for it.
Why is that? Is it because they specifically set out to understand it better?
Well, why does Alibaba understand it better? I think it's more a part of kind of, at least recent Chinese culture than it is a part of recent Silicon Valley culture.
Sébastien.
So, I mean, what I'll add to that, I think, is, and why I think what we're trying to achieve in the luxury space is interesting, is that, number one, obviously, the Chinese consumer is the biggest consumer of luxury products in the world. And a lot of that consumption, which used to happen outside of China, is now happening in mainland more and more. But then the other thing, and as you were talking about, Ian, earlier on this idea of new retail, is that the way that they engage with brands is totally different than people do in the Western world. And so because it's different, it requires also a different approach. And what we're trying to build with luxury brands and with LVMH, as well as others, is the way to talk to this customer and to create the right engagement, and this idea of new retail, which isn't just digital, which isn't just in store, which is kind of a mix between the two. And it's not omni-channel, because omni-channel is like very easy to do, really. Now it's not really a question anymore. It's really about how do you engage at every step of the way with the consumer. And we are really making a lot of advances. We don't know what the answer is. We're trying to figure it out, but we've made significant investments in the offline world to be able to test that out, and we're doing that with brands to figure it out.
Is it easy to understand a totally different mentality? You say they react to luxury different. Is it easy to understand, to get into that?
Well, I think a big part of what we do, and both of us, is we're cultural translators. It's not about language. It's about taking the culture of a brand, which doesn't need to change, but like adapting it to the market, and it goes both ways, right? Like I do a translation internally. with the executives at Ali, with our CEOs and our VPs, etc., and then we do it to the consumer as well. But I think a lot of brands, I'll take the example of Remova, because I think it's one of the best ones in terms of what LVMH has done in China, which we had this big event called See Now Buy Now, where it's like a fashion show, and people can see and look. Actually, I think you see what is there in the back, and people could follow it. There's 100 million people who watched it live, and they could pick the products on their phone and put them automatically into their baskets and buy them. But what Remova did there is that they used like a local KOL called Fan Bingbing, which is like a really famous Chinese actress, followed by like something like 80 million people on Weibo, which is the Chinese Twitter. And then they did a special capsule collection of a suitcase done by a Chinese artist. So they really get that that's what's going to speak to the consumer. So, and the cultural translation comes from discussions that they've had with local people. Like you can't figure that out just by sitting in an office in Frankfurt.
Ian, you come from Apple Music. I would be interested to hear how you've adapted to LVMH. What struck you particularly, and how do you take what you learned from Apple Music and use it at LVMH?
Well, and there was a lot that I didn't know, obviously, that you immerse yourself and try to learn quickly. But some of the similarities, I think, when you look at the way that the internet has disrupted culture and the way that culture is transmitted, I mean, that's pretty fundamental and impacts across the board, Western world and Chinese world as well. Fundamentally, consumers have more choice than ever before, and they're exercising that choice. It's what we saw in music, and it's what we're seeing in luxury as well. And one of the great things is that you now have this ability to get the culture of a brand to all of these places that you just didn't have access to before. You have worldwide, people have the same access to Instagram or WeChat, and it touches even the smallest parts of the world, anywhere where anyone has a mobile phone, which is everywhere. So,
but there are cultural differences all the same. You have to make a very different approach, especially digitally, depending on the cultural mindset.
It's true. I think though that this is where you empower the local markets to use the tools and to be where the consumers are in the way that they're there. Also, though, in a way that's appropriate for the brand. And I think the ones who do it well are the ones who always express exactly what the brand stands for, but they do it in a way that fits into the life of the local customer.
How do you define your customer experience? How do you want to set your customer experience, l'expérience client at Alibaba? What kind of relationship do you want your customers to have with what you're doing?
So I mean, what's interesting is that we started really like at the brand level, like in discussions with brands, because we feel that in the luxury space, we need to define and to create an environment that the brands are comfortable with, because they're used to being in specific environments. The other thing is that we know that for them also it's complicated to go towards the e-commerce route, because they feel that the in-store experience is such a big part of what they give their customers. So we have to take all of that into consideration. That's where we started. As far as the consumer is concerned, so what we created, which is called the Luxury Pavilion, which I think you might be able to like see up there as well, is really this environment that is invitation only. So it's only a certain subset of our customers that have access to it. And obviously, only certain brands have access to it as well. And the idea is to create an environment which has like a lot of content, which is really beautiful, which is really in line with what you would find in a store. But that's only one step, right? Like the other steps is to include a lot of engagement with the consumer based on, maybe having fashion shows, maybe having events. Chinese consumers love event-based marketing, so we'll push a lot of that online, but also offline. And then again, clearly creating that link between the online and the offline world. But we launched it in August, and we're learning. I think the power of what we have and what Alibaba has as a company, and it's maybe like the hidden part of the iceberg and the part that maybe isn't talked about so much, is data on our consumers. We have so many signals, and the idea right now is we're analyzing all the signals that we've been getting for the past 3 or 4 months and adapting the platform to these signals so that it adapts to the consumer. So, algorithmically and with artificial intelligence.
Ian, you seem to be agreeing with this. Data is obviously very, very important. It's the new thing, the accumulation of data, and also these events-based ideas. What would you like to say about that?
Well, I think, and just to chime in with what Sébastien was saying about the customer experience and then getting to data, I mean, I think that you need to divide, the customer experience into 2 parts, and one is really the brand image, which is a creative endeavor, and it's not like you're doing market research and using data to make that creative image happening. That is a function of creativity. But when it comes to serving the customer, where bricks and mortar really was the great experience 5 years ago, that's really about customer service. That is the one where, as Bernard Arnault would say, the customer is the boss, right? And so within that, you want to serve the customer, and you use everything that's available to you to make that customer experience better. So that's the traditional in-store experience, but also self-serve tools online, whether it's your website or an app, and those can be personalized using data, but also care at a distance, whether it's chat, and some of that chat is automated with things like chatbots,
How do you deal with that? How do you cope with the vast volume that you're going to have if you start interacting on such a personal level with your client base?
This is what luxury does. I think this is what sets luxury apart from other categories is you really do interact at that level. If you look at what Louis Vuitton does in its call centers around the world, you can get the same service or the same level of service from a Louis Vuitton employee via the telephone or via chat or even via Twitter. That you can in store, and that's really a requirement of luxury, in my view.
We have 2 minutes left. The most exciting development in terms of luxury for you at the moment. Give us a little scoop on what you think is the most exciting thing that's happening.
I don't know if it's a scoop, but it's something that I think is going to happen tomorrow, and I think this is where digital and technology is going. We've been in this kind of pull system where you go on Google and you make searches and you get results, and I think we're now getting into like a push thing where computers and artificial intelligence is going to know what the consumer wants before he even actually has to say it. And I think that in luxury, it's interesting because I think luxury is amazing. Luxury brands are amazing at servicing their existing consumers. The one thing they don't know is who their next consumer is going to be. And in China, even more so, because the average luxury Chinese consumer is 14 years younger than the European Chinese luxury consumer and 25 years younger than the American consumer. So basically, instead of talking to a 55-year-old American woman or a 40-year-old, 45-year-old French or Italian woman, you're talking to a 25 to 30-year-old Chinese girl and woman, and she's gonna have totally different needs and whatever, and being able to know who she's going to be ahead of time. I think we're able to get these signals, and that's what's going to be really exciting, is to be able to tell a brand, this is going to be your next consumer.
And what excites you, Ian?
I think what's exciting is with this unlimited consumer choice, both marketing and retail are going to fundamentally change over the next 5 to 10 years. So it's everything that Sébastien just said about personalization and the knowledge of the customer and an individualized customer experience. But I also think retail, as it becomes more experiential, we've had this suppressed supply and suppressed demand in luxury online. The culture has been free for 20 years now, but the supply and demand has been suppressed, and that's all getting unlocked. You know, we launched Celine via e-commerce last week. We launched Givenchy a couple months ago. We launched Berluti a couple months before that. The supply that was previously suppressed is all becoming unlocked. The retail experience is becoming more of a physical experience, and I think, you know, if you just look at what we did for marketing and retail in the last 15 years and where the growth came from, what we do and the growth in the next 15 years will be completely different, and that's an exciting frontier.
And you finished exactly on time. Thank
Boom.
you. Boing. Voiding the
Mic
gong.
drop.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating.